Hello. We have all seen this image. It's perhaps the most famous religious drawing in the world. It has been printed on prayer cards, hung in living rooms and cast in plaster a million times. But we stop really seeing the art. Today I invite you to join me in a small exercise of patience and humility. As a German artist, viewing Albrecht Dürer's work feels like looking in a distant ancestor. But when we look at the praying hands, we often only see the icon. Today, I want to look at it through the eyes of a painter. I mentioned this is a small exercise, but it taught me a lesson in humility. Not just because of the subject matter, but because of the sheer discipline behind it. Imagine the situation in 1508. Dürer is using a quill or a medieval brush with ink on blue paper. An unforgiving medium. He was painting his own left hand. This means he had to hold his hand up against a mirror, holding that pose for hours, dealing with muscle fatigue and shaking, while his right hand executed these flawless rhythmic hatchings. And the most humbling part? This was just a study. A preparatory work for a tiny detail in a massive altarpiece. The amount of work Dürer invested in just preparing to paint is something we in our fast-paced world can barely comprehend. We cannot create the lost original oil painting, but we can try to honor that dedication. I will be translating this tonal drawing into an oil painting using the Grisaille and Glazing technique. It is a study of structure, patience and turning a drawing into an oil painting. So let's go to work. The drawing needs to be very precise. It should clearly show where the light and shadow will be. I am painting on a wooden panel just like in Albrecht Dürer's time. However, I primed it with a modern non-observant universal ground by Michael Harding. First I apply a transparent imprimatura using burnt umber. I thinned the paint with a green for oil thinner by Sennelier. For the background I use ivory black. This was common in Dürer's time and also used by artists like Cranach or Leonardo da Vinci. I make sure that the edges of the subject are defined cleanly. Since the light comes from the left, I paint a warm undertone in the black on the lower left side using brown ochre. Finally, I smooth out the brush strokes with a fan brush. This creates a nice, even, dark surface. Now I can start the Grisaille of the hands. My goal is to be very precise right from the start. The more details I capture cleanly in this grey phase, the easier the glazing will be later. My reference is Dürer's brush drawing, where all light and shadows is created by hatching lines. I have to translate these lines into smooth gradients. Painting hands can be a real challenge. The technique of separating tonal values and color using Grisaille and Glazing makes it much easier for us to create something like this. As always with Grisaille, it helps to first place the tonal values as blocks and blend them afterwards. A marked stick helps to keep the hand steady and concentrate on fine details. Try to see forms as abstract shapes. Detach yourself from the object. Don't think finger or hand, just look at the abstract pattern. This makes it easier to paint complex areas. Most paintings have an ugly stage where you think, no finger looks like that. But focusing on the abstract shapes helps you bridge this gap. You have to trust the process. In the end, it will look like a finger. I'm using the dry brush technique here. I use no medium or thinner for the Grisaille, just the paint. I use my pre-mixed grey paints, which are a cool grey. You can find a video about this mixing technique on my channel. With the dry brush technique, I wipe almost all the paint off the brush. It feels more like drawing than painting. I draw the dark patterns on the back of the hand to keep my orientation. Now I mark the lightest areas, followed by the midtones. I build up the forms step by step and blend them carefully. At this stage, I'm not using the dry brush technique anymore. I am applying more paint now. Here I'm working in a darker grey, almost black, to get the tonal values right. And now painting the Grisaille for the shirt. The Grisaille is finished. I will let it dry for a few days. For the first glaze I put only a few colors on the palette. The main mixture is mostly brown ochre with little vermillon and yellow ochre. For the shadows I add some raw umber. Important tip: test your glaze mixture mixed with white on a piece of paper first. This way you can check if it creates the expected skin tone. When you apply the glaze, it might look wrong at first, but again, trust the process. Now I paint into the wet glaze with white. I'm not using lead white, but a substitute from Schminke called flake white hue. This is a key step. I'm not just creating skin tones, I'm modeling the form with soft transitions. Since I plan to add another glaze later, I choose a slightly reddish tone for this first layer for warming up the cool Grisaille. Here I intensify some shadows with raw umber and ultramarine blue to make them cooler. Now the other hand. This is my first time using brown ochre from the French company Shadow. The color is beautiful, but very oily. It is a bit difficult to spread evenly on the Grisaille. Here you can see the problem. The glaze is beating up a little on the Grisaille. I am not very happy with the brown ochre, but I will stick with it to keep the color consistent. Luckily, I can fix most of it when I work in the white highlights. So the first glaze is almost finished and I let it dry 2 days. Now comes the partial shadow glaze. I use raw umber, ivory black and a little ultramarine blue for the cooler parts. It looks a bit patchy right now, but remember, there's still a fine glaze to come. The next glaze is a mix of red umber, yellow ochre and a touch of madder red. I start with white on the lightest area to check the tonal value. As you can see, I also use small amounts of white in the shadow areas. And again I start with the lightest value. I also check the color against my own hand, even though my studio lighting is a bit too bright. I'm working very precisely now. For the shadows, I use a cool mixture again. I will also highlight these areas with little white. So the glaze is finished and needs to dry for 2 days. I quite like the shirt already, but I warm it up with some transparent Van Dyck brown. And again I work white into the wet glaze. After drying I add the final details. I use semi-transparent colors, ivory black, Van Dyck brown and raw sienna. For the fingernails I mixed white with a touch of Venetian red. I intensify the darks, but only in specific spots, the edges, skin wrinkles and a hint of skin texture. Finally, the highlights. I tinted the white slightly with ivory black, Venetian red and raw sienna. So, the picture is finished. It was an interesting study. I hope you learned something new. And thank you for watching.